Hi, welcome to an overview of learning the fretboard. This is intended for beginning advanced level guitar students. So, people who are really comfortable playing open chords and you're able to play nice and clean bar chords and you're probably playing some, pentatonic scales and then you're kind of stuck in this rut and your question is, where do I go from here? So this is a position I found myself in. I took a year and a half of guitar lessons when I was 14 years old. For 4 years or so, I, just kind of wanked around for, you know, um, with those things that I knew. I got pretty good at the things that I knew. I wasn't really able to advance that much. And I find a lot of my guitar students are in the same position. And so this is basically what I'd like to present here is more an overview. This isn't really a lesson per se. This is an overview of what I call a systematic approach to learning the fretboard, and looking at it from a few different perspectives that I usually cover with my students and which I found useful in my the way that I learned. So that being said, I'm going to just give you a quick overview. So I want to talk about four things basically. We're going to talk about scales, we're going to talk about arpeggios, we're going to talk about the cage system for learning chords up and down the neck, and we're going to talk about chord inversions. Okay? So those are the four fundamental things I think that are very important and helpful for fretboard mastery, for mastering the fretboard. So let's start out now with the major scale, okay, or scales. So first scale I usually like to teach my students is the major scale, and the way that I think about it is I call this the sixth string. I have what I call root six scale positions, okay. So we have three scale positions. So I'm in the key of A here. And I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. Okay? That's what we call the first position. The way that you'll see if you go out on YouTube or whatever, you'll see people use these terms. There's like 5 scale positions. I think of them in terms of the root 6 and root 5 and learning the 3 positions, okay, on each of those roots. So like I said before, that's a position of A major. This is another position of A major. This is a third position of A major. Okay? So 3 positions of that A major scale. And the next thing I really like, as I'm having my students learn that, I really stress learning the intervals, okay? So learning 1, 2, so counting the notes out. This is a diatonic scale. It's 7-note scale. It repeats on the 8th note, right? So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 1. And so that's kind of that's multifaceted. The reason I like to do that, first off, it gives us a common language. So a lot of times I'll say, the root on the 4th string in the key of A or whatever, you know what I mean? So it gives me and my students a language to talk, to be able to speak about those notes with. And it's universal in terms of it doesn't matter what scale I'm on, right? So, or what key I'm in, I should say. So the thing that's important to remember about the guitar, or to know, is these scales are just patterns that can be moved to a different part in the neck, and then you're just playing that same major scale for whatever key, whatever note you're starting on, right? So when I say root 6, I mean the root's on the 6th string. So if I'm here on G, right, E, F, G, if I play this same pattern, now I'm playing G major scale. Here I'm playing G, A, B, I'm playing a B major scale. C major, D, etc. Okay? This is the 1. This is always going to be 1. When my second finger's starting right here, whatever note I'm starting on, if I'm playing this scale shape, this is my root. That's 1. These are 2s. This is the 2 in G, and from this note, this is the 2 from that one. That's the 2 from there. That's the 2 from there. So I really like to, I stress the importance of learning the intervals, learning the scale steps. I should say scale steps, which I then, as we start to, learn more about theory, it's an easy progression from going from a scale step to an interval. Like, okay, so this is the second scale degree in the major scale. Well, that's also a major second, okay? So now let's look at the root 5 shapes, right? So if I'm in A, so here we've got this shape, and now starting here on A, I've got this shape here, this position. So there's this one, and then the next one is here. Let's just do 1 octave, just so you understand the idea. So here's 1 shape on root 6, 1 shape on root 5, 1 shape on root 6, 1 shape on root 5, 1 shape on root 6, 1 position on root 5. Okay? So if you think about it, what we're mostly doing here, if we, take a step back to analyze these scales are all on 3 or 4 strings, right? So another thing I like to do is break the scales up into groups of, 1 string, 2 strings, 3 strings, 4 strings. So we've already looked at some of the shapes or the positions with 3 and 4. So if we're just doing it on 1 string, right, we're starting on A, B, C, D, E, F, G sharp, A. Sorry, A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A. Let's not get into notes though for now, so let's keep on our scale steps. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's also a good way of visualizing. When I'm teaching these scales, it's always important to, usually, we always teach people to memorize where the half steps are. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. So in major scales, our half steps are between 3 and 4 and 7 and 8. So it's very easy to visualize this all on 1 string. Okay? 2 strings. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? Or here. Okay, so that's learning, learning the scales on groups of 1, 2, or 3 strings. So the next thing that's really important, next step from scales is arpeggios. So the way I like to look at arpeggios is I look at those as breaking up. So let me define what arpeggios are. An arpeggio is where you take the notes from a chord and play them, one at a time. So more melodically, right? So I'm going, so if we have an A here, our A chord has a root, a third, and a fifth, right? All our major chords are based on the first note of the major scale, the third note, 1, 2, 3, and the fifth note, okay? So in C, we've got C, D, E, F, G, C, E, G. It's our root, third, fifth. And in A, we've got 1, 3, 5, 1, 3, 5, 1. Okay. So right there it was. So here's our chord. Here's our 5, here's our 1, 3, 5, 1. But here I'm going 5, 1, so I'm just going to add my third in here. So I'm going 1, 3, 5, 1, 3, 5, 1. So that's what we call an arpeggio. Okay, so those are where you're taking the notes from a chord and just playing, playing them as a, that's a seventh. So arpeggios are very important for learning to improvise melodies melodically, right? You could play those in a solo. If I'm playing over A, it's always going to be safe to play a chord, a note that's in the chord, right? Because you can't go wrong with a chord tone. Okay, so those are arpeggios. So the next step then is learning chords, right? And how chords move up and down the neck. So a lot of times if you go over, do some searching on YouTube or whatever, you'll see this system called the cage system. A lot of people like to teach that, and I find that a good way of helping people visualize learn the fretboard also with chords. So what the cage system is where you're taking these open C, open A, open G, open E, and open D shape, and learning those, up and down the neck for a particular chord. And that helps you then to start, learning the fretboard from a harmonic perspective, right? So harmony is when you have two or three more notes at a time is harmony. Melody, like we're doing with arpeggios, is single notes, right? So if I have C, I'll give you an example with C of what we mean by cage. So it literally spells out this word cage, right? So here's our C-shaped C chord. And now I've got an A chord, right? I've got an A bar chord with my C in the bass, so that's an A-shaped C chord. Our root's here on the fifth string. And then we've got this G. I don't usually play it like this because I can't get these notes clean, but I like to play, just play kind of a group of notes. That's the G shape. And then here's our E shape and D. So we've got C, A-shaped C chord, G-shaped C chord, E-shaped C chord, D-shaped C chord. So, that cage system is a really good way of memorizing the chord shapes up and down the fretboard. And of course, you can recognize those scale shapes of scale positions we were going over before. So of course, the goal is to be able to match like we were doing with arpeggios, matching your scales with your chord shapes and chord positions, right? So we've got scales, scale shapes, scale positions, chord shape, chord positions. So we're always, I know I'm sorry, I'm using those words kind of um, interchangeably, which I do think of them that way. Um, so just to be clear, scales and shapes, I'm just meaning, sorry, shapes and positions are just different areas on the neck where you're playing the same groups of notes, either melodically with scales or arpeggios, or um, harmonically with chord shapes. And so the last thing I want to go over is chord inversions. Okay, so what a chord inversion is I learned these when I have an ethnomusicology degree. I had to take a year of music theory. And when I was studying music theory in college, they made us learn like all the major scales on the piano, and then we had to learn all the chord inversions for the chords. And basically, what an inversion is so if you have a root, a third, and a fifth, are the three basic notes, right? We already discussed that. Those are the three basic building blocks of a chord, right? You have your root, your third, and your fifth. So what an inversion is where you're just putting those notes in different combinations. So root, third, fifth, root, and then fifth, root, third. Okay, so you're inverting the way the notes are placed, okay? So if we think about it now on a guitar, we've got four groups of three strings, right? So we've got this one, this one, this one, and this one, all that are next, on top of each other. So I like to look at inversions. So I'm just taking like a chord and breaking it up into three string groups of three notes up and down the neck, okay? So if I have my C chord here, let's put the fifth in the bass, my G. And here we've got 5, 1, 3. And so now I'm going to go to my G shape, right? 1, 3, 5. Sorry, that was B. 1, 3, 5. So here we have 5, 1, 3. 5, 6, 7, 1. 1, 2, 3. 3, 4, 5. So 1, 3, 5. So what would be next? 3, 5, 1. So these are all my inversions of a C major chord on 6th, 5th, and 4th strings. And then this is a pattern, right? So if I go here, I can do that here. And then here I went to this one, right? So now I'm going to go up to here, 3, 5, 1. To 5, 1, 3. Now to this string. So these, of course, are coming right out of the chords, right? To these string. So anyway, that's a nice approach, a nice overview of learning the fretboard, an approach that I like to take with my students, and which, as you start researching stuff online, you'll see different ways of different names and different ways of covering this material that I've talked about. Um, so that's a really good overview, and please let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Thank you.